Good morning, Will. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Very good to talk to you. Very good of you to agree to do this roundtable for the British Council. I wanted to just look at your CV and just kind of talk a little bit about what you've done to put it in context for the other people that are taking part, and for the people that may want to know more about what this is about. You started off, as I can tell, really working in the radio. That your original passion in terms of broadcasting?
Absolutely. I was driven as a teenager as to how they made radio. How did it happen? I grew up in a very, very small village where there was a bus once a week to the local town. It took you there. You were there in the town for 90 minutes, and then the bus took you back again. So everything I learned from effectively radio and TV. And then when I was 18, 19, 20, I began to work on radio stations. And gradually through fair means or foul, ended up at the BBC, became a music producer, an audio producer, and so on. And audio has led a lot of my thinking, I think, in terms of the ability to generate stories and turning things around quickly and accurately under pressure. Yeah, it's a fascinating medium that's having a massive resurgence in another form.
I don't think it's ever really died away, though. The power of radio in many ways. I mean, the spoken word in that sense strikes me as being still incredibly important and more important than ever before in many ways. But you did a lot of stuff which was, as you said, around music. But you also spent some time working on comedy.
Yeah, I ended up working out that the bits in between the records was where there was most fun to be had, and gradually found through working with some very, very funny DJs that you could take that bit in between the records and turn it into something else. So I became, again, through default, really, a comedy producer, and ended up working with a lot of interesting people, beginning with people who actually worked in music. So I worked with people like Flight of the Conchords and Tim Minchin. Uh, I produced a couple of hit singles, and it was one of those spaces where it's about being around creative people, essentially, and musicians and comedians have a lot in common.
But you also made a switch, didn't you, at that stage from radio to television? Is that fair?
Yeah, I moved. Once you land into a comedy landscape, there's a kind of trajectory a lot of people find themselves on, which takes you through um, trying ideas out and then being able to develop formats and narratives in audio and translating them through to TV, which is obviously also something that happened with people like Flight of the Conchords and various others. And at the time where I was working at the BBC, radio was very much the nursery slope that generated TV hits, and it still continues to do so.
And then you ended up being a creative director at the BBC for 3 years, and then went across to DCMS, I think, to work with Ed Vasey as a consultant there. Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't Ed, it was Matt Hancock,
Oh,
but
right, okay, it was directed
Ed
with
had
Matt.
already moved on. But yeah, I ended up after comedy, the interesting area became podcasting, and podcasting started to realize that what you could do on digital platforms was going to be massive, and it was probably going to be the birthplace for a lot of new and interesting ideas. And moving away from comedy, I ended up managing a lot of digital production for the BBC in terms of new ideas, new ways of working, Google, YouTube, Facebook, games engines, that sort of thing.
And that's
Um,
and is that where you started working also on StoryFutures, the UKRI bid and the like?
yeah, the work that finished at the BBC was essentially about next generation of storytelling. That's what DCMS became interested in because they wanted to understand what the UK's cultural sector might be capable of, and that was the work I ended up doing with DCMS. And from there, it was very clear that once you're inside government, the opportunity was going to be available to think about what research and development would look like inside the creative industries. And that's how StoryFutures began, which was effectively after there was a sector deal that allowed the creative industries to reimagine what R&D would look like.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, there was a really interesting opportunity to think through what would it look like if the creative industries had a similar opportunity that areas like pharmaceutical and manufacturing had? What if it had an R&D base? What would that look like? And that allowed us to create a bid for StoryFutures and StoryFutures Academy, which is still going.
And that's really been a pivotal moment in many ways for the UK's creative industries in the past decade, hasn't it? That shift towards being able to have a research and development fund which actually is targeted towards them and the way in which they work.
Yeah, I think as you look at, say, right now, what's the strategy around economic growth? What's the idea of needing to be ahead of the curve in lots of different sectors and areas? We're seeing it in, for example, in energy right now, right,
Yeah.
for very obvious reasons. But the UK's creative industries have always been such a powerhouse in terms of we are best in class in the world in areas like film, TV, music, games, all these sorts of things, right? But how you stay ahead of the curve is about the way in which you do perceive what does, for example, a spatial internet, a 3D internet mean for the creative industries. And that's a lot of the work that we do at StoryFutures Academy. Yeah.
So can you give us a flavour of the sort of things you've been talking about at the StoryFutures Academy?
Right now, we're in the middle of delivering the UK's largest ever immersive storytelling project, directly funded by DCMS. It's a project called Story Trails, which has been a nationwide tour that has taken 3D storytelling and historical storytelling and brought them together. We've done mobile augmented reality story trails. We're in Lambeth this weekend telling the story of Winifred Atwell, one of the first UK Black musicians to have a #1 hit. And you can experience her story in a mobile augmented reality trail in Lambeth this weekend. We're creating immersive 3D films, maps generated by LiDAR scanning and taking scans of people, places, and objects, repurposing them. We've got a series of virtual reality documentaries that reimagine and repurpose film and television archive from the BBC and the BFI. And the key driver in all of this, and I presume the way in which we found the funding, was we made the case that this was a training exercise to actually take the UK's next generation of creative talent and those people that generally are kind of not well funded in the space, a lot of kind of very diverse, inclusive generation of talent, and showing them how to work with these technologies, how to tell stories with these technologies, and hopefully train them in such a way that they go on to have really meaningful and purposeful kind of careers using these technologies.
So are a lot of the people you've been working with through the project also people who are self-employed? They're just emerging into the industry in that way. They've not been taken on board necessarily by larger businesses yet.
Yeah, I think the industry is kind of characterized by having a large freelance base anyway, and you have a lot of young people trying to make their way in film, TV, and increasingly digital media. So we've taken a lot of the people who would naturally find themselves applying for things in those sorts of areas, and then training them in how you would use LiDAR scanning technologies, how you would be able to tell stories in 3 dimensions. There's also, interestingly, a lot of audio production that goes into this. So we have hired 50 emerging creatives, put them through a virtual training program, and then given them the opportunity to tell these stories across the Story Trails tour.
And it's quite an interesting consortium you've got around the program, isn't it?
Yeah, we have been able to, through the relationships we have, and also because of the size and scale of what we were intending to do, we have been able to work with Niantic, who are, probably the world leading company in the space in kind of place-based storytelling in AR. We're working with Sketchfab around the kind of scanning, who are part of Epic. We're working with the BFI and the BBC. We're working with David Olashoga's production company, Uplands Television. Some amazing companies as well, Glasgow, ISO Design, doing installations. There's a really interesting consortia of creative companies that have come together to make the project. Yeah.
And do you sense that in actual fact there are people that aren't in the consortium that actually may want to be there sooner rather than later, if that makes sense? People, for example, who might be working on something to do with tourism and have a kind of interest in developing it. You were talking about the tour you were creating in terms of that's taking place in London this weekend. So do you see that as being an opportunity as well?
Absolutely. I think what we have created is something that was largely thought through as an innovation project for kind of art sector and culture sector in terms of what would happen if you put different interests together. But in terms of if you look at the potential growth and opportunity and what will happen in metaverse, spatial technologies, all this kind of stuff, obviously there are interesting outcomes from the project that you could apply in tourism, place-based storytelling, companies like travel, travel organizations. We already know in some hotels around the world, you can get or you can be given VR headsets, so you can experience different parts and different places of the world. So yes, what we're doing really does have interesting commercial exploitation opportunities, but we are still at cutting edge. We're still at kind of probably pre-market economy in terms of a lot of the stuff that we're exploring.
But that's part of the excitement, isn't it? It's trying to find where those opportunities are in terms of the market as well.
Yeah, it's always, and I'd say that's what's characterized my career. It's always very enjoyable to be at the edge of something just as it's about to take off.
Yeah.
And then when the model becomes known and people know how to do it, you tend to find, TV got boring because people were making the same times of shows again and again and again, because it led to a relatively successful economic model where that worked, but creatively it gets a little bit frustrating. So you're always trying to move ahead and so find out what the new thing is. And I think what's exciting about at the moment is no one's quite sure what the creative opportunities that a 3D internet metaverse may provide, but everyone knows it's going to be the next big thing.
Well, that's certainly true, and everybody's talking about it, and we'll be talking about it next Monday. So thank you very much indeed, Will. We'll look forward to welcoming you on to the roundtable discussion on Monday, and thank you for doing this with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.